Good evening. Welcome to a special edition of the International Grapevine. This is your host, Wallingford Lee, of course. Tonight on International Grapevine, we want to put the spotlight on Eric Adams. I'm talking about the mayor of New York City that was doing a wonderful job. And it seems to us, one of the reasons why we're putting the spotlight on him, it seemed like a lot of things have taken place recently. He was indicted, and we want to know what's going on. What does that mean for the city of New York? Considering the fact that, for me, it's very surprising. This man was a policeman one time, so which means that he has a background and he's supposed to know what he's doing. He's been brought into court and stuff like that. He claimed that he's innocent. So today in this program, we want to talk a little bit about Eric Adams. What does he bring to the plate? What happened to him? Why he's into a position like that? The most amazing thing of all of these things is that 11 people that are part of his team have resigned. So again, and some of these people that have been resigned have been investigated by the feds also. So we want to take the opportunity today and International Grapevine to talk about Mr. Adams. Where does he go from here? What are his responsibilities? And if he will continue being the mayor of New York, and whether he can prove that all these allegations against him are nothing but bourgeois. Well, we have our special guest on the program today, Brother Hank Williams. It gives us a great deal of pleasure and, of course, satisfaction to have him on the program. Hank has been with us for a long, long time and is a man that tell it like it is all the time. Hank, welcome to our program.
Always appreciate the invite and love to be talking with you.
Same here, same here. Well, again, like we said, Eric Adams right now is in a hot seat. We understand that he was indicted. What does all of this mean to him and also to the city of New York?
Well, it means a lot to both of us. For him, obviously, his political career is in serious jeopardy, especially since he's up for reelection next year. For the city, I think the question is a little bit more complex, partially because of what I just said. He's up for reelection next year, and even prior to the actual indictment, he had a few different people who'd already announced that they were going to challenge him in the primaries, and that sort of follows a first term that's really had a lot of general challenges and ups and downs. So it's not necessarily one of those cases where the power of incumbency can sort of overcome anything, which a lot of the time is the case. In the case of Adams, there were a you know he's basically faced a lot of problems in terms of governance. So I think for the city itself, it may have been time for a change anyway.
It's amazing. I remember when he won. Competition wasn't that big, but he was ahead, and I think he was well received. So all of this kind of surprised me a little bit, and it seemed that some of the investigation that has taken place has gone back up to 2023 or 22. I don't know what the feds
Earlier than
saw.
that, actually, 2002, they've been tracking him since 2014 in the indictment.
So that mean that it's gone back. Maybe there are certain things in that were open, and now everything is taking place, and it's hard on the city because the truth of the matter is he has to defend himself. But what does it mean for New York? Can he be trusted under this type of situation? Is he really truly not guilty based on what he says he came across, made a presentation when he came out of court, and stuff like that? And as we go forward, somewhere down the road, if it's not solved right away, I think the governor might move him. And what would that mean for the city? What it would do if he's moved and put someone temporary in? What is the implication in something like that?
You raised several very good questions and points. There are about four of them there. To deal with all of them in rough order. Well, the first thing I should say is that I'm not a trained attorney. So I can't really speak, I can only speak within a certain amount of depth in terms of the legal issues, but I can't really give a whole lot of analysis legally in terms of what it is. I have actually read the 57-page indictment and have it right here. Having said that, there are a few things. One, the governor has not really said too much about this publicly, and I think that's kind of understandable. For those outside New York or those who aren't following it very closely, Governor Kathy Hochul and Eric Adams have been very close allies, and had a fairly close working relationship. It's politically expedient for, well, I shouldn't say expedient. It's politically convenient for both of them. And in terms of the city, it's been a fairly good thing. And to give just a little bit of background, Hochul, Hochul took over after Andrew Cuomo was forced to resign. Hochul was lieutenant governor, but Hochul was from upstate in the Buffalo, kind of outside Buffalo, New York. So one of the things that sort of happens because you have the bulk of population around New York City is that politically she had to cut a lot of deals and negotiate with New York City politicians to be able to shore up that political base. That's not necessarily totally a bad thing, and that's kind of how politics works. And in the case of the city, it can bring very good things because you want to have your interests represented, and if somebody has to make compromises for you, then that's part of the process, and that's a good thing. So Hochul is being very, very careful in terms of what she says publicly. That's also kind of difficult for her because neither she nor Adams are extremely popular. Even though they both won election in Adams's case and re-election in Hochul's case by quite a bit. Neither one of them were incredibly popular before this broke out. So she what did come out was that she was advising Adams that some of the people close to him who were possibly involved in this or involved in some other things really really had to go. Essentially, she advised a house cleaning, which I think is probably, politically was and is absolutely what has to be done. The bigger problem that you get into in the second part of your question in terms of whether or not he can govern, that's one of the larger things people have been asking because, he does, he should have a certain presumption of innocence, but at the same time, governing New York City is an extremely it's an ex, it's an extremely difficult process, even for somebody who is incredibly focused and has everything in place. And with Adams, I'll say the bigger thing about this, just to try and keep this brief, is that even before the indictment was released, there were he base you know he's basically had a lot of, well, one, I think he's made some bad, or to be a little bit more charitable, questionable appointments. And he's also kind of had revolving leadership in a lot of key positions in the city. And I don't think he had very solid plans in terms of what he was actually going to do in some very key areas. And that's one of the things that I think has made this whole thing much, much more difficult, and will make it much more difficult for him to govern because at this point, pretty much all of his initial leadership team is gone, including some people who were very close to him and very trusted by him. And getting getting anybody who's going to be really talented and really dedicated and really focused on a job, I think is going to be hard at this point because he's only got about a year to go. So anybody knows that he's going to be out the door fairly soon, and I don't necessarily know that somebody with a very good reputation and is very talented is going to want to connect themselves to that, or to the possible fallout in or to the possible fallout of the investigation. So that's going to be one of his biggest challenges. And I think the fallout to the city is not necessarily the day-to-day stuff because traffic will still get picked up. police will still do what they have to do. Fire department will go out and answer calls and things like that. But what you lose in those situations where you don't have solid leadership is you basically lose the ability to plan long term, have some sort of stability, actually have a strategy for the much longer intractable problems that really take a lot of focus to try and solve in a city and ultimately determine whether or not you're going to be successful in governance. And that's the capacity that I don't think Adams and his team has anymore, and I think is going to be very difficult to get back, if
I
not
agree with
impossible.
you. I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's a very complex situation all around. Uh, the governor that we have in New York now, she took over from Cuomo. Cuomo was an excellent governor. He took on Trump head on, and he was not afraid of him. Now he was forced out, and she took over. Now all of a sudden we have all this complex situation with Adams today, and then both of them are from different platform. If you look at it, he's the mayor, she's the governor. What all of this mean for the state of New York and the city of New York? Because now this is the first time we have had a mayor who's indicted, and it seems like
Hmm.
there's a lot of things on the records, according to the feds, according to the newspaper, that goes way back with him, which I'm a little surprised. This man was a policeman for many years, so I'm going to go on the assumption that he knows what he's doing, he knows what is dangerous and what is not dangerous. So I don't know if before he took over, he had a lot of things in that was not too smooth. And
Hmm.
now there's a rumor that Cuomo himself would like to be the mayor of New York because obviously he was a good politician and he wants to
Hmm.
come back. So what all of this mean in terms of both platform and in terms of maybe Cuomo wants to come into the city and be the next mayor, or would he wait to see what the result of Adam's situation is before he put his foot out there? So again, all of these things are very complex, and in New York City is very big, and they want stability when it comes to their mayor. They want stability and control. And if now he's on the wrong side, should he be replaced immediately or let the investigation take place and see where we go from there? He insists that he's innocent. So it's a very complex situation all around for the city. And obviously people are concerned. People are concerned because New York is New York. Where do we go from here?
Well, for the state, I don't. For the state itself, I don't know that it actually means that much. Although I think your characterization and mine of New York as being very key in terms of the state economy and much of and really much of the attraction of it. The thing about government, at least in our system, is that there are many things that are on. I don't want to say they're on autopilot, but it's set up so that the institution essentially preserves itself, and that's kind of a good thing. But as I said earlier, what happens when you have a revolving door or confusion or instability at the top is you very much lose your ability to plan long term, and that's a problem. And those problems are things that hit you 2, 3, 5, 10 years down the road. So that would be the long term issue. But mayoral terms are only 4 years anyway, and Adams is just about at the end of his. So situation's going to be resolved one way or the other fairly soon. That's one. In terms of the more substantive question that you asked, about Adams and his background, that's a very good question. And one of the key words and key points you brought up, which Adams did too, is that he said, "Well, look, I'm a former police officer," and Adams said, therefore, I direct everybody in my team to act according to the law. And the problem is this. Well, first of all, I'm not going to actually try to psychoanalyze Adams and get into what's in his head. But I will say a few things. One, if you actually read through the indictment, the the thing that really stunned me was just the brazen aspects of a lot of the things he was accused of, and quite honestly, the clumsiness in terms of dealing with it, in terms of the quid pro quo and everything else that went on, which is for me really hard to believe because I'm actually a state employee too, and the ethics rules for us are very, very clear. And we have, as somebody somebody who teaches for a living, the amount of potential complications and contradictions with my job are relatively small as opposed to somebody like Adams, but they're very clear. Basically, they say, you can only receive, in our case, very small gifts. I believe it's under $60 or something like that. But the direction is basically this: you should essentially refuse anything that isn't a very small gift. Certainly refuse it if it's in a situation where some sort of impropriety can be seen, or there can be, or there's a possibility that there can be some kind of influence over you. And they say that that's basically the easiest way out of it. If you're not sure, turn it down. And or actually ask the ethics people, and generally they're going to tell you to say no anyway. So here's the thing: the fact that and here's the problem. Adams is not Trump. He's not a neophyte to elected office. Adams served on the state level. He was then Brooklyn Borough president for 2 terms, and now he's mayor of New York City. So he's see, and that's kind of one of the problems with any possible defense he has. He's very experienced in all this stuff, or at least he should be, and he should know the rules of campaign finance, ethics, fundraising, all those sorts of things. And the things he's been accused of are very basic breaches of pretty clear rules. So the problem that kind of comes up is either they're wrong, and the things that have been alleged didn't really happen, which seems like a kind of difficult argument to make. Again, me not being a legal scholar, but either the evidence that they have is either the evidence that they have was is not correct, or or there were some serious problems. And the other piece of that is, if you're going to say that people very close and connected to you don't know, then the larger question that I have to ask is, well, what does that say about your judgment? But here's the slightly problematic thing, and that's this: within certain elements of the police and other officials in the city, there's really this sense that the rules don't fully apply to them. And that may be part of the problem that's kind of happening with Adams, or at least there's a certain entitlement in terms of the amount of service they do, the amount of what they put into it, that they're entitled to these extra things. And the problem is, the law doesn't really work that way. And the job doesn't really work that way. When you go into public service, there's an understanding that there's a trade. That's certainly that certainly goes on with me and a lot of people in my position. We could make a good bit more money in other places doing exactly the same job, in some cases doing a little bit less. But the trade we make is because we have a commitment to the city. In my case, I very specifically have a commitment to the students in our institution, which are largely coming from around the area where I live. So I understood all that going in, and I understand all that right now. But that doesn't really entitle you to try and take more out of the job than was promised to you.
Very well said, very well put, no question about it. That's why I said this thing is very complex. Um, I think he definitely need good legal representation.
Mhm.
If he's innocent, he's going to need a very good attorney because the charges are very heavy. There are charges saying that he have taken money on the side from some of the Turkish guys or Turkish government. There are other implication that he has helped some of them to get a big building at a very low cost. There are other implication that he has done quite a few favors. For me, it's hard to believe because, like I said, he was a borough president for 2 or 3 years.
Hmm.
He also was a policeman, so he has to know the law. He has to know the implication. To me, it doesn't make sense. Um, but again, he insists that he's innocent. I hope that he can prove it because they are coming from all directions for him. They're trying to grab him as quick as possible. And another part that really surprised me that I don't understand. Well, what I do understand, 11 folks that are on his team has resigned or pushed out. So it seems to me that this thing is more deep than we know. I mean, I read in the newspaper and I hear it on television. So I'm concerned, first as a black man and as a mayor, and what it means to the city, what it means to him, what it means to us, you know. So it's hard to say where did we go and how long it will take before all of this proof come to the table because this is not an easy thing and it's big. And somewhere down the line, depends on how long it takes. I'm sure the governor might be forced to take a step to remove him if this continue, because this is the city of New York and we need representation and you must have a mayor in control of the Board of Education, in control of a lot of things. And so this is not an easy thing. And if it continue like that, it could get messy, and he might be forced out before he can prove his situation. Do you think he'll be forced out before he can prove where all of this is going?
He might. Although I'll say this. I likely the way I would see that happening on a political level is that much more pressure is put on him under the under the table or very quietly to say, look, I really think you should step aside because it's this isn't a fight that either he nor Hochul wants to have in public. And I think in this case, Governor Hochul, who's the one who actually does have the power under the state charter to remove him. um, I seriously doubt she wants it to get to that level. Again, as I said, because of political considerations, her taking out, her being seen as taking out a the mayor of New York City and b the second black mayor in the city's history is no matter what he actually did. I mean, short of some stuff way beyond what he's been accused of, is not going to hit well with a lot of people. Even a lot of people who don't really like Adams, partially because of that upstate slash downstate tension. So I can, I mean, I'd say with a good bit of conviction that it's if she has to go public and remove him, that's something nobody wants, and I think Hochul probably wants that even less than Adams. In terms of the other points, it's terms of the other points. I don't really know how. I'm not too sure how Adams can actually extricate himself from all this, very easily, if at all.
Well, like I said, it's very complex. One of the things that's very complex is supposedly the favors of flying all over the place, and it's been paid by other people. I'm surprised at that. He's got to know better than that. If that is true, wow, that's a biggie.
Hmm.
Then the other part that I think they're concentrating on is the favors to Turkish people, a certain part of the Turkish government.
Hmm.
That's a huge bomb if it's true.
Yes.
I would like to think that it's not true, but that depends on him. It depends on his attorney. It depends on proof on what have you. But it seems like the Fed's been digging for a long time,
Hmm.
and they probably found out a lot of things. But one of the things that I want to bring out or ask you, what do you think New York thinks about this entire thing? Because we're a big city,
Mhm,
and there's a lot of people that their ears is this a fact? Is this is true?
mhm,
I think they're very concerned, and I think quicker than we think she might be forced to make a move soon.
mhm,
Obviously, you know, we know that the voting situation is taking place in November. So a lot of things mix into that. It's not just him. What does it mean for the city? The scandal, the situation. People are now talking. Even you have young kids that are going to school talking about it, college and stuff like that, and it doesn't sit well for the Big Apple. It certainly doesn't sit well. And somewhere down the line, he's either going to be forced to resign, which I think he doesn't want to do right now, because he want to prove himself that he's innocent. But that's a process that could take a long time. I mean, his
mhm.
attorney come across like strong, he's innocent and everything. We hope and pray. But there are certain bells and whistles them that are attached to all of this, and I don't think the citizens of New York like what's taking place. So somewhere down the line, something has to take place. What could that be? Could that be resignation, which I don't think he wants? Or maybe she might be forced to do something. And what does it mean for all of the city going forward?
Well, he clearly doesn't want it and has been pretty adamant about that from the beginning. But the thing is, the longer this takes to play out, the less options he has, and the more difficult, I think the more difficult the situation becomes. Partially because of all the problems that I've laid out previously. I think it would be different if he'd had a very good plan in place. If I think if he were more skilled in terms of management and all that sort of thing, it might, and quite simply had a higher level of popularity, then the discussion you have is different, because to go back a little bit, if you think about Marion Barry in DC, people were, and people outside DC were kind of shocked after he was convicted and then reelected as a city council person. And the thing is that, Barry was much more than that. People remember him going all the way back to the days of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Commission, and the very long period of public service he's had, kind of consistently, and the amount of service that he did for DC, and the amount that he was seen to be doing for very specifically DC's black residents, which were the majority of the city. The discussion situation around that with Adams is much more complex, because he doesn't have he's well known in a lot of circles, and interestingly, that's where a lot of his support is coming from. When you see, say, the Reverend Al Sharpton saying, well, not necessarily saying he's innocent, but saying, he deserves to have the process play out, and Governor Hochul should not step in, which interestingly I saw kind of as a sign to both of them, because Sharpton is very, very influential in the Democratic Party. Certainly, still on the national level, but certainly on the state level. But it's but Adams was largely calling in. I think it seemed like Adams was largely calling in favors from people he has very, very long connections with, or maybe not calling in favors, but leaning on those relationships. And the thing is that doesn't necessarily translate to much more broader base support, certainly within the wider black community in the city. But the other piece of that, which I think is interesting, is that the average person doesn't really follow that level of politics as much as you'd think they would. I mean, yeah, they'll see they'll see the news, and they'll see the headlines and all that, but I think their calculation is much, much different, in terms of a simple, nuts and bolts thing of, okay, well, he's, my mayor is indicted, so something absolutely has to be wrong. There's there's really enough disillusionment, or at least skepticism, about the entire electoral process amongst the general electorate, that I think they're willing to, in some cases, they're willing to overlook a lot of things. Whether or not that holds true in the primary, I think is a much different question. If you have, if Adams has some strong primary challengers who I think can present a good case for themselves, and present good arguments about how they'll run the city, and are able to able to generate the amount of name recognition that they would need, then it may actually be moot, even before the general election, and he may actually lose his primary.
Well, interesting. You mentioned Sharpton. Obviously, Sharpton came a long, long way. I can remember time when the city was against Sharpton.
Hmm.
But he was a very powerful man. He did a lot to help the black community. I remember the marches that he did in certain part of Queens where a couple of young men went to buy a car,
Hmm.
were assaulted and stabbed. Matter of fact, Sharpton uh, did a quiet movement in the city, and he himself was stabbed, and he came a long
Hmm.
way. Today, Sharpton is on the radio. Today, Sharpton is on television every morning. And again, this means a lot to us having a mayor that is black, and all of a sudden, all these type of things have taken place. It's not good for the black community because,
Hmm.
which means if he came out and he's guilty, another person as a minority trying to come in is not going to be an easy thing. Do you think that Adam should take a leave of absence because of all of these things that are taking place?
Well, in a job like his, the problem is there is no leave of absence, and and I think that's kind of a I think that's actually a much broader discussion we should have about how we think of governance and how we think about people in high positions, because the amount of stress and the amount of the amount of responsibility, you can argue, may be too much for one person, but that's a much larger political question. I should say up front that my allegiance is much more to New Yorkers and the larger Black community than it is to Adams, and it's I have allegiance to Black politicians and leaders to the amount that I see them being in actual service, of the wider Black community, and trying to actually improve the lives of everyone. So, having said that, I'm really kind of ambivalent in terms of what it means politically for Eric Adams, but I actually think that we should hold black elected officials in much higher regard, and I think the stakes. I will say you're correct in terms of the stakes being higher, but I also think that considering where our communities are in terms of needs, and where we are in terms of the need for representation, and actually honest and uncorrupted representation, I think the bar and the standards should actually be higher for you to live up to them. That's certainly the case with I'll say that's certainly the case with Black teachers. There is a lot expected of us, but we know that going into the job, and those of us who step up to try to accept that mantle, there's a lot of strain and there's a lot of stress, but part of it is you sort of understand the mission that you've taken on, and that it has a lot more significance. And I would say the same thing with black elected officials. We should hold them in higher regard, because we expect them to do several different things, some of which are incompatible with the way the system is set up. But at the very least, we expect that when they're at the table, they're essentially going to be articulating our needs, many of which are not going to be popular in the public domain. But they're the one, they're the ones with access, and they're the ones with a much wider microphone. So we expect them to say that every time they're out front. We expect them to introduce and try to put forward solid public policy that's going to help us in very concrete, tangible ways. And the very basic thing should simply be honesty and a certain amount of integrity. You take a look at the late Harold Washington in Chicago. Part of the reason Washington is beloved by just about everybody is simply just because people saw that it was much larger than helping the black community, although that was part of it. But people saw that he was doing quite a bit simply just to have very good governance and very good administration. And I think that's the thing that can kind of spread much further across the lines. People in general actually want fairly good, efficient governance. And, they want a government that's going to be responsive to the people. And I think anybody who does that is going to have a reasonably successful political career. But certainly, black elected officials who do that, that's one of the things that can partially insulate them against a lot of the generally embedded racism. And when that is eroded, or people don't see that, then, well, one, the black community feels particularly betrayed. But two, unless it's actually graft that's going to everybody else, they're not going to get support there either. And I don't think the Turkish community in New York City is quite honestly big enough to carry him. And then they're not getting anything out of the deal either. So I don't see the alliance there working out.
Obviously, you mentioned Washington. I met him many years ago in Chicago myself. Very strong man, did a lot of things for the communities out there. And it goes without saying, with what's going on here with Eric Adams, I'm concerned as a black man. I'm concerned about how it's viewed in the community. I'm concerned how the newspaper, the media present it and stuff like that. So it's very, very important for him to be innocent if he's innocent, and he needs to step up to the plate because it doesn't make us look good as a minority. And not only that, what does it mean for those young black men coming up in the community? As we begin to close the program, I want to take the opportunity on behalf of the family of the Grapevine to thank you for being present here and answering some of the tough questions that I have put out there. And I just want to say that we hope to have you back on to see where this goes. And I hope that he's innocent and that he can prove it, because it leaves a bad taste in the New York community for us as Black people and for New York in itself. And again, I want to thank you for being my special guest and for laying on the line with things and that you've seen and what you have read in the reports and that you have had, my brother. And I want to thank you again for being my special guest.
Appreciate it, and always happy to come on whenever we can arrange it.
No question about it. And again, this is Wallingford Lee saying thank you for being my special guest. And we have a lot of things in that we're going to bring to you down the road. No question about it. And again, I hope this program has been to your liking, and we'll see you next week at the same time, at the same place on the International Grapevine. Good night.